Yeah, that's literally. So I wanted to get started. You know, there's a million things we could talk about. I know that you moved to San Francisco in 1999. You have spent a huge amount of time there, but you also travel a lot and have intermittently lived in different places. I mentioned before when we were chatting earlier before we started that I myself, having first went to San Francisco in 2003, I've periodically been back there. I see a changing city. I'm really curious to talk about it, but the reason why I'm curious to talk about it is I think that we live in a world where every city feels that its job today is to replicate San Francisco, yet at the same time, maybe not the best things are actually going on in San Francisco. I'm just kind of curious to hear about your journey from there.
Well, it's interesting because the first time I went to San Francisco was in 1986. Some family friends moved out to the Bay Area, and we went out there for my spring break, and I loved it. I thought it was the most beautiful, magical, wonderful place ever. And we went on this little trip to the San Andreas Fault, and they were talking about what would happen to the city when the big one comes. And I'm going to totally screw up these numbers because it was 1986, so cut me some slack. But, you know, basically it was that the city would be buried under feet and feet and feet of glass just from when all of the windows break in the skyscrapers. And I remembered very clearly having the thought, bummer. I would have loved to have lived here, right? And so when I finished graduate school in 1999, I decided to move to San Francisco because I had this really strong interest in tech. And SF, for those of you who haven't been there, you could say it's America's Melbourne. It's... You know, New York is the financial and theater capital. Los Angeles is the film and entertainment capital. San Francisco is the culture and weirdo capital. And it has been this way for a very long time, and that really appealed to me. A big part of why I wanted to move there was it's the only place I'd ever been where no matter what I do, nobody will look twice. Nobody. There is nothing I can do that even ranks at all on the weird scale in the city of San Francisco, and for once not being the freak was really appealing. And but in terms of how it's changed, like when I moved there in 99, it had already started. So let me be clear, like in 1999, the story was already gentrification. In 1999, the story was already tech workers are pushing out the artists. And were we? Yeah, we were. And this has just simply grown and magnified and even exponentially gotten worse over time. This is a totally anecdotal story, but it's true. I know of a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in the Outer Mission that rents for $16,000 a month. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, no parking. And I shouldn't even use the word house. It's a flat. $16,000 a month. This is what has happened to San Francisco. And for a long time, there was a divide between the money that was in the valley and the weirdos that were in the city. There's been money in the valley as long as the valley's been on the map, but it used to be separated. But when they started running all of the tech buses, this is when it changed everything because the valley money moved into the city, and that is when the weirdos were like, shit, where do we go? So we went to Oakland. I moved to Oakland in 2009. Oakland! Oakland, for the record, is the best. I'm not even kidding. If you're thinking about it, just move to Oakland. Trust me.
When I was last over there, I got the constant, it's like San Francisco X number of years ago.
Yeah. Oakland's marvelous. But, you know, what has happened to San Francisco is I was telling Reese earlier, since the turn of the century, I've been back in San Francisco at least every 2 months. For the last 17 years, I'm there at least every 2 months. That's the longest I've ever gone without being there. And it has changed so much. It's not just the expense, it's the kind of people, it's the way they behave, it's the expectation, and it has moved from being a culture where ideas and hard work and originality were rewarded to one where it's really just about how much money do you have. What can you buy and how comfortable can you be? And it breaks my heart because it's the only place I've ever been that I've called home. I've lived in 10 states, 2 countries. I'm a dual citizen. My partner is an Australian. Do the math. We belong nowhere except for San Francisco, but sadly, we don't belong there anymore either.
It was referenced before, Magic Leap is one part of an extraordinary career that you've had. I think people are fascinated by it. If I can just ask you, Wired Magazine described it as the untold story of the world's most secretive startup. Can you unpack it a little? Just give us a little insight into Magic Leap.
Sure. So Magic Leap is a secretive tech company in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I don't even know what an equivalent to Fort Lauderdale, Florida would be in Australia. It's not quite Roxby Downs, but it's, it is not a place where there are tech companies. It is not San Francisco. It is not Boston. It is not a place with great universities. It is not a place where you expect innovation to happen. Magic Leap is creating what they call a mixed reality device, which means that one day you will be able to wear this device, and data and information will appear in the world right next to the real world with you. So unlike virtual reality, which completely changes everything, so if I put on a VR headset, I will not see the people standing in front of me. An augmented reality or mixed reality system actually brings digital data and blends it seamlessly with the world around you. So for instance, there could be a cat sitting on this table that isn't really here. That is what Magic Leap is pushing to do. And that is the very nuts and bolts of what they're creating. But I think the vision, and I don't want to speak for Rony, because Rony is an absolute visionary. He is the CEO of Magic Leap. But Rony really dreams of using technology to create a better world. Rony really dreams of using technology to solve a lot of problems, particularly in education and things like that. And so Magic Leap the tech is real. I will say this on camera, the tech is real. There's a lot of speculation that it's vaporware, that it's made up, that it's hype. It's not. Unfortunately, their NDA is also very real, and so that's as far as I can go.
So on that, and I want to ask you this in a general sense, but then having kind of been exposed to it, do you, and I mean this not in regards to Magic Leap, but I mean this in regards to just your general view, do you see the application of this technology for the betterment of humanity? Did you find yourself ideating away, saying, "Wow, I can see this solving real problems," and for that reason, do we have some good things to look forward to?
Absolutely. So. I know a few of you were at Pause yesterday and saw my keynote because a few of you come up and talk to me about it. My keynote at Pause yesterday was largely about what I call the unintended consequences of innovation. So I believe that 99+% of the work that's being done in technology is being done by people with good hearts and good intentions. But unfortunately, we're often so busy wearing the superhero cape that we never stop to put on the supervillain helmet and to actually think about how could this go wrong. We're so busy trying to think about how it could go right that we don't think about how it could go wrong. So do I believe that augmented reality has tons of great possible applications? Absolutely. It could completely revolutionize education. It could help us to connect to one another. If you think about what technology has already done for marginalized communities, like something we don't tend to think about, but text messaging has completely changed the lives of deaf people. Completely changed their lives. And this technology has the ability to do that. People are already looking at using virtual reality to help people who suffer from PTSD. Augmented reality can help people with hearing difficulties. It has lots of opportunities. Think of it as a translator. You land in Japan, and when people talk to you, you could actually read subtitles of what they're saying. It could open up entire worlds for us. But my concern here is that we're so busy running toward that brave new world and toward that beautiful future that we don't stop to think about what are the side effects that we're creating along the way. Are we taking away people's agency? Are we creating another marginalized class that isn't a part of this? These devices aren't cheap. They'll get cheaper with time, just like everything, but they're still not cheap. They require you to be wired in and part of a network at all times. Some people don't want to do that. Are we just creating yet another stratification of the haves and the have-nots? And I really hope that we're not, but it's a definite concern.
I wanted to swing around to touch a little bit upon the work you're doing today. You build a reputation as an international thought leader in UX and design. You worked at HP Labs, you were at Apple briefly, I think, when the Apple Watch came out. I was kind of curious to ask you actually on that. Is that Apple's first failure?
No.
We'll take this offline.
Newton. The Newton.
Yeah. We forget that Apple had a life between Steve Jobs's.
Correct.
At Teague, AKQA, and of course Magic Leap, you are, I don't have it in front of me, but your role at Yale University, I think you're...
Yes. I
So
graduated
you're
from
heavily involved in
Yale.
education as well?
I spent 12 years as a professor at California College of the Arts and the University of Washington. Yeah.
So you've got corporate, startup, advisory, a whole range of things on your side today. You're working with innovators, I think, is your passion, and I assume what pays the bills as well. You know, when we think about innovation and kind of contextualizing that into processes and outcomes, we think about, you know, Eric Ries, and we think about a whole range of different sort of, you know, the revolution that's happening on the MBA side, if I can call it that. I wanted to ask you, in your view, the role of design thinking and what influence and what role does it have on the success of some of the great innovations that are happening today?
So I think design thinking has been absolutely crucial. There's a whole other talk I do about what has happened to design in the last 30 years and how it, as a profession, has changed more in the last 30 years than it did in its entire lifespan, and how it will change more in the next 30 than who knows. But, sorry, what was the question?
You were just ready to go. But no, and I agree, and I think you're heading towards it. I guess what we're seeing is, and everybody I'm sure is seeing this, is the emergence of design thinking and its application to business. And I wanted to get your take on it because I think it's deeply misunderstood.
Yeah, I lost the thread. I do that. So I think design thinking has been really amazing because it has allowed people who aren't designers and don't have that thought and skill set to really understand the value of what designers can bring. If you look at the most successful companies that are working today, in general, they're design-led companies. They are companies that realized that what makes my peanut butter better than their peanut butter, if it's really all just peanut butter, is ours spreads more easily, right? It's the companies that really thought about who is going to use this, what do they want, and how can we deliver that to them. Those are the companies that have had a better time because it's a very crowded marketplace. We live in a world where anyone can have a storefront these days. So how do you differentiate yourself? You do it by creating something that's better than what's already out there. The flip side, or the dark side of design thinking, is that I think to some extent we've sort of over-intellectualized design as a process. We spend so much time up here metricizing, data driving, observing, that we forget about this and this and these. By which I mean, we are emotional creatures. We have really strong intuition and feelings. We know when something is true. You have all had it. When you realize something or someone tells you something that you know at your core without evidence is true. We understand truth and we feel it here. We understand emotion and we feel it here. We understand movement and exploration and we understand it here. And those are the pieces that I think design thinking has forgotten about. And so I don't really talk about this publicly because it's this nascent thing forming in the ether, but we need to remember about design feeling. We have to make sure that the systems that we are designing aren't just taking care of people's thoughts, but are taking care of their hearts and their minds and their souls. And this is one of the things that really concerns me about virtual and augmented reality and the shift toward them is this is not watching a scary movie. This is living a scary movie. And there's a really big difference between, I told the story yesterday, my sister watched Jaws on a 20-inch television back in the early 80s. She's 40 years old, she's scared of sharks. To this day. There was no chance that that shark was gonna get her, right? That shark was this big. And yet, imagine if my sister had watched Jaws in her head, in her eyeballs as a child. We have to be really careful about what we're doing to people because we don't necessarily understand these parts yet, as well as we understand this one.
Just out of curiosity, does it trip you out that people in boardrooms in, you know, Fortune 500 companies want to hear this stuff these days? Because they do. I think they do.
It trips me out that they didn't want to hear it 20 years ago.
Yeah. Right answer. I agree. I touched on this briefly with Karen around trolling, and I wanted to get your take on the ugly side of tech and communities. What role can design play at this point in architecting better environments that are more conducive to productive public discourse?
Oh my gosh, I love that you asked this. When I was walking up here, I almost just wanted to say I agree with them. Goodbye. But I do agree, and I think it's worth saying that I agree completely with what both of these lovely ladies said. And one thing that really struck me when Karen was talking about bullying is she's absolutely right. This is not new behavior. It is not new behavior. It is just simply behavior that's now easier, behavior that's now more publicly visible. And so actually my answer to this is, it is absolutely important for the Twitters and Facebooks and all of these social media to actually take a strong stand on harassment and have a policy. But that is not going to fix this problem. Not a chance in hell will this fix this problem. Because things like bullying are a human nature emotional problem. People are bullies because they feel like they don't belong. People are mean because they're afraid. And we have to start addressing these problems at a super societal level, because the easiest way to get rid of harassment on Twitter is to actually address harassment as a social problem that doesn't have anything to do with Twitter. Karen touched on this earlier, but all technology is, people, is a mirror. All this stuff does is shows us who we truly are as a species. That is why Black Mirror is so freaking scary. Because you know as well as I do that it's possible. You know as well as I do that one little thing out of touch, boom, that's where you go. You know this as much as I do, right? That's the Black Mirror. And tech holds up a mirror to ourselves. So what can we learn from that? Instead of, and I do feel really strongly that Facebook, Twitter, these social networks, they have to take a stand on this, but at the same time, they didn't create this problem. You know, as Billy Joel said, we didn't start the fire. We Oh yeah, weirdest Alysha thing dropped tonight so far. Oh, just you wait. You know, it's a human nature problem. It's not a technology problem. And anyone who says it's a technology problem doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. Yes, we have bigger megaphones now, and I can shout my story from a mountaintop and a lot more people can hear it. But the people who were mean are still mean. They just now have a public forum to be mean in. We've got to address this as a societal problem.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And this is why I'm always like, we are going to talk about feelings.
So you started, I think I read you started off punk rocker, a skateboarder, and a zine editor. Maybe that's not young enough, but I want to ask you the question. If you could nominate 3 things you'd tell your younger self, what comes to mind?
So weirdly, I thought I was going to be talking about this for half an hour, so I built like a whole story. I will not do that.
I just keep it up.
No. I will be as brief as I can. But I did actually put a lot of thought into this in terms of the things that I think, this has nothing to do with tech. Nothing, by the way. But the things that I have learned since I turned 40 that would have drastically changed my life before. And the first one is, your strengths are your strengths. And by what I mean by that is, every single one of you has strengths. Every single person on the planet has strengths. They are so inherent and like a part of you that you don't think about them. Just like you don't think about breathing, you don't tell your heart to beat. You don't understand that your strengths are strengths because they're so much a part of how you work and think and look at the world that you don't understand that everyone else has them. So one thing that I did when I was younger that I really wish I didn't do is I beat up people for not having my strengths. Because I didn't understand they were strengths, I thought it was just the way the brain works. And so when somebody didn't see things strategically the way that I did, I thought that meant they weren't paying attention. But in fact, it was just that I didn't own that I had a lens that not everybody has. So the first is, don't beat up the people that don't have your strengths. Actually be glad that you have them and offer them, share them, instead of like using them against people. The second one is the whole concept of boundaries. All through my 20s and 30s, people were like, girl, you need boundaries. And, and let me tell you, they were right. And here's the reason I bring it up. I had this completely wrong concept of what that meant. I thought that having a boundary meant that I built a wall between you and me and we will never have a close relationship. And that is bullshit. And that is maybe the thing that I was the wrongest about in my entire life. Because boundaries just simply mean that by telling you, sorry, I'm picking on you, but you look friendly. By telling you what I don't want, then you are free to be yourself. And a brief anecdote about this, I spent much of the last couple months living in California because I was training for something, and I lived with my friends through this. And I know that, house guests, 2 to 3 days, get out. You guys are more generous in Australia because, you're far. But in America, 3 days, go. And I spent weeks sometimes at their house. And the first day I got there, she sat me down and she said, I love you. Monday and Friday she's a musician. Monday and Friday are the days that I compose. I need you out of here from 10 to 5. The rest of the time, this house is yours. And what that meant is I never tiptoed around. I never felt like I was in the way because I knew that if she wanted me to leave, she would just tell me. So by being honest with people about what you do and don't want from them, it actually frees them to be themselves. And that boundary made our relationship so much stronger because instead of worrying, am I in the way? Do I need to leave? I knew she would just tell me. And the third one, I'm trying to be brief, I promise.
You're killing it.
Okay. The third one is what I call make the salad. And that is, I do life coaching as well. And make the salad is probably the thing I tell my clients most often because they often present themselves to me with this. So I'm not really happy at my job, and they just handed me this shit sandwich. So I could take the shit sandwich, or I could just totally run away and eat the shit soup. And often we present this idea of like, I either have to do this thing I don't want to do, or I have to leave this thing I like entirely. Screw that. You are resourceful. Look around you. There's a tomato. There's some spinach. Make a salad. You do not have to accept either one of the things that somebody wants you to choose from if you're not happy. Look around you. You are resourceful. Build the thing that you want. Make the salad you want to eat. Don't eat the sandwich. Yeah?
Thank you. Alysha, thank you so much.